Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to talk about one of our favourite topics here at Narrative Wargamer, and that is of course the main narrative play system that Games Workshop provides us with to play our games of Warhammer 40,000 on the tabletop. I'm of course referring to Warhammer 40,000 Crusade. Now, if you've listened to any of our podcasts in the past, you'll have heard us talk about the Crusade systems and a few of the different codexes and campaign books that Games Workshop's put out over the recent years. But I felt that this was an important video to do because actually a lot of people, especially either new to the game or new to narrative gaming at least, certainly, have a lot of questions about Crusade, and actually sometimes this can be a little bit intimidating when people first take a look at it and all the paperwork and admin that they perceive as being involved in this. So today we're going to have a little video talking about Crusade, what it is, and we're going to hopefully demystify some of those questions that some of you might have about how to get started with your own Crusades. So to start off, it's worth explaining first of all just exactly what Crusade is. Maybe if you're new to narrative gaming and you're just looking into Crusade for the first time, or perhaps you found this video on our channel for the first time, you might not actually know what Crusade is. In essence, it is Games Workshop's main narrative play system for playing linked games of Warhammer 40,000. So actually sort of creating a little story arc that runs between a series of games that you play and tracking some sort of like progression and levelling up, as it were, of some of your units and characters as you play those games, and basically telling a little self-encompassed story about your army and what it is actually doing and achieving in the setting of the game. It's a great system in principle, which should hopefully, add a lot of character to your own personal collections, armies and games that you play with your friends. But it is also quite intimidating to a lot of people when they first look at it, because it seems like there's a lot of admin involved. And I'm here to tell you today that thankfully that is not the case, and actually Crusade can be a lot simpler to get into than it looks like. It's worth mentioning at the start that Crusade is at its best when played with a small group of friends or at a local gaming club between a dedicated number of players over possibly a preset number of weeks or months. It's not really especially great for pickup games. There is an element of it that's been advertised as this in the past from Games Workshop, but really in practice it works out a lot better between a small group of say 3, 4, 6 players sort of thing, and in that scenario that's when Crusade is really at its best. So if you and your friends are hoping to start a Crusade campaign, here is everything that you need to know in order to actually start playing your first Crusade. All you have to do is write a 1,000-point army list, and that's it, you're good to go. No, seriously, that's really all you actually have to do. Let me explain. So the core rules for Crusade are available for download on the Games Workshop Warhammer community website. There'll be a link in the description below that you can follow. Go there and download the Crusade rules for yourselves. These are just the core rules that fundamentally lay out how you build an army and how you track its progression and everything else that you need to know to get through all the various different layers of things around Crusade. However, the upside is that actually a lot of this can be stripped out, especially if it's your first Crusade and you're wanting to get started with something simple and just get into playing your first games. It's really not that complicated. The core rules suggest starting out with essentially a 1,000-point force. Now this is technically your collection of models as opposed to an army list that you play with. We'll get onto that in a minute. But basically, as suggested, you start out with a 1,000-point force and you build it up over time into a larger 2,000 point plus army as your units develop and upgrade and you play games in your Crusade. Now, technically speaking, you don't even have to do that. If you wanted, you could create 2,000-point army lists, pretty much your standard match play list that you might even use to play standard mission play decks. You can just start with any size of Crusade force that you want. So that's probably one of the first questions worth asking is, in your group of friends, do you want to play an escalation style campaign where you start with say a 1,000-point army and it grows over time? Or do you just want to start playing with your normal 2,000-point armies so you can have a bit of fun tracking experience and upgrades for your units as you play your games? You can do both. You can start at any kind of scale that you want. I think it's perfectly fine to just play with 2,000-point armies and track your upgrades and create some character and story as you go. If you as a group of friends and players do want to do an escalation style campaign, then personally I suggest just setting some predetermined points in time where you're all going to upscale your forces. So every 2 weeks you add another 500 points, or another 250 points, or however many you agree as a playgroup, and that over time you can reach those points limits. The way the Crusade system works technically is you're supposed to have a roster of all the units that you can include in your armies from game to game, and you pick from that roster to use in individual games every game. This is, I think, an overcomplication. You don't need to do that. If you think of your order of battle as basically your entire collection, all the models you own, and your Crusade army that you use in each game is the elements of your collection that are restricted by the current points limit you're playing with. So you might have a collection of 4,000 points worth of models in your army. That can be your order of battle. If you're only going to start playing at 1,000-point games, then just play 1,000-point games picked from that, each week. And then over time, you as players decide when you want to increase that points limit, and then by 2 months down the line, you are playing 2,000-point games, but just picked from your entire collection. You don't need to worry about actually tracking them as two separate things. Just have your collection, and then have the upgrades and experience that your individual units in your collection have acquired during your Crusade. Building your first Crusade army list works almost exactly the same as writing a normal army list. The only difference, basically, is that you can't purchase enhancements. Other than that, you start with, say, a 1,000-point army list, build it out in the app like you would do with any other army list, or pen and paper, your format of choice. And the only reason you don't include enhancements in your initial army list is because you buy these later with requisition points, which is a thing we'll get to shortly. So you've got your 1,000-point list, you've got all the units that are in your 1,000-point list that you're going to be using from your collection. Great. Now again, as suggested, the core Crusade rules give you these Crusade cards, and the idea is supposed to create one of these for every single unit in your army. And this basically is like the individual information for tracking the stats in that unit. Again, it's too much information. You don't need all that. It's too much admin, it's overcomplicated, it's unnecessary. My suggestion here is basically just create yourself either like a little Google Doc or even just a note on your notes app on your phone. And all you need to do is basically just include the name of each of the units in your army that you want to track experience and level ups for. Because that's the other thing. This is one of the key things actually I think about simplifying the admin involved in Crusade. You don't have to track experience and upgrades for every single unit in your army if you don't want to. You don't need to track how many kills your Rhino has or how much experience Intercessor Squad number 3 has if you're not interested in actually pursuing upgrades and experiences for those units. And you don't need to, because ultimately tracking the experience for these units and giving them some upgrades is going to give them some cool extra bonuses or extra abilities or just improve their performance a little bit on the tabletop. But it really shines at most when it's used on characters or other like significant units in your army. Like, yeah, sure, fine. Maybe you do want to know how your Orc Stomper is upgrading, but you're probably not that interested in how your 3 Orc Trucks are. Like, you can pick and choose which units you actually want to bother tracking experience for. If you only want to find out, how many kills your Warlord has got and how much experience they've gained and what cool relics they've gained on their Crusade, great, that tells a story. As I say, you don't need to worry about the cultist mob. Narratively, they're probably not the same guys from battle to battle anyway. Just track the characters and units you want to see upgrade and get a cool story behind them, like the key figures in your army. If it's your centerpiece model, your characters, and again, probably doesn't even need to be all of them. Do you need to track how many upgrades and abilities your apothecary's got, or you're mostly interested in your chapter master? That's where you can cut back a lot of the admin and really simplify the Crusade rules. So to that point, in your little Google Doc or your notes on your phone, just make a note of the name of each unit that you do want to track. And then there's only really 2 things that you need to track for them. 1 is how much experience they've earned, and 2, any cool upgrades or new abilities that they might have. That's it. Now, I've talked a little bit there about earning experience for different units, and essentially, this is kind of the core mechanic of Crusade, and really, ultimately, why you're playing a Crusade. So, you earn experience through a few different systems, and again, some of them we can strip out. We really don't need them. It's overcomplicated, and this is the simplest way to do it. There's basically 2 core systems of gaining experience. The first one is, after every battle, every unit that took part gains 1 XP. Great, thanks for showing up. Slowly, everyone will get a little bit better over time. The second one is Marked for Greatness, which essentially is picking your MVP at the end of each game, where you can pick 1 unit and give it an extra 3 XP for just doing great, Now, as written, again, Crusade rules suggest that you pick your own unit. I personally think it's a great idea to pick each other's units with you and your opponent. sort of just have a little friendly discussion about which of your opponent's units you think was probably their MVP. And that way, experience goes to actually units which did good things and not just picking them to give them XP to get them leveled up quicker and stronger and better and buffs on buffs on buffs. It's a really good system to pick between you and your friends. And again, if you are playing friends, you'll probably end up getting some grudge matches against each other's various MVPs from game to game. There is technically a third core way of gaining experience, but it's very minimal, it takes a long time to achieve, and it's extra tracking and extra admin, and I think you can just scrap it. And that is the Dealers of Death rule, which basically means for each one of your units, you have to keep a combat tally every time it destroys an enemy unit in any game. And after every 3 enemy units destroyed, you gain 1 XP. It's a lot of admin, you don't need to bother with it. And again, like I said, we don't really need to track how many enemy units your Rhino's killed. It's going to take a long time till it gets even 1 XP off Dealers of Death. Scrap it, get rid of it, you don't need it. And then finally, in these core Crusade rules, there's basically a little table that just explains when units reach X many experience points, they gain an upgrade, they gain a battle honour. And this is now essentially the core reward of why you're playing Crusade and why you get these upgrades. When a unit's gained enough XP to gain an upgrade, it can basically pick one of 3 things. It can either gain a battle trait, which is a new ability, it can get a weapon modification, which is improving the stat line of one of the weapons that unit is armed with, or if it's a character model, it can get a Crusade relic, which essentially is like an enhancement. It's a new unique piece of like war gear that character now carries, which gives them a new ability or special rule or possibly a new weapon profile that they can carry, and they can hold on to that indefinitely throughout the Crusade. Crusade relics are actually, I think, one of the main things that really adds an element of fun to Crusade. This is where you get some of the really weird and wacky fun war gear that exists within the background. Things like vortex grenades, displace of fields, chaos boon mutations, stuff like that. This is where all the really unique things can be adding character to your characters. And again, one of the reasons why I think if you really want to simplify Crusade, just track upgrades for characters more than anything else, because that's where all the really fun stuff is. Now, I've talked about the different upgrades that you'll get from earning experience with your units, but there is one other thing that can affect them as well, and that is battle scars. Now, this essentially is the debuff system that exists in Crusade. So, at the end of every game that you play, for every one of your units that was destroyed, you roll a d6, on a 1, you don't have to roll on a battle scar table. Now again, the basic battle scar table is included in the core rules available online, and basically this is a d6 table of debuffs, which that unit would then have a negative ability on them. And you can track that again just in your little app. But don't worry, these debuffs are not permanent, and it is quite simple to actually get rid of them, and a lot of the time you might roll one up and then you just immediately use a requisition point, we're getting to them, to get rid of them straight away, so they're not going to hang around for long. Also, battle scars, another reason why you really don't need to track everything for every unit in your army, because again, you might not be interested in how many kills your Rhino's got, but technically if you have to make out of action rolls for it and it gains a battle scar, then again, you have to make a note of that, it's more paperwork, you don't need it. It doesn't matter if your Rhino's got -1 OC and can't benefit from auras. It's probably not going to affect the game that much. And that gives you a payoff then to whether or not you are wanting to track experience and upgrades for any given unit. Yeah, sure, you want to know if your characters have got a battle scar. Just track upgrades and debuffs for units you want to actually tell a story within your army. It'll simplify your admin. I cannot say that enough. So that's the basics of really getting started with Crusade on the most fundamental basic level. You've created your 1,000 point list, you've chosen which units you want to track experience for, and you've got your own little notes app just with their names, how much experience they've got, and what upgrades, if any, they have. And that's really all you need to do to get started on the most basic level. Everything else at that point then starts adding a little layer of extra stuff to it. And honestly, once you've got the gist of that, the next bit is, again, really quite simple and adds the main interesting elements of Crusade. So the first part of that is a requisitions system. This is essentially your army building resource that you'll use to purchase specific upgrades for your army as a whole and a couple of units in them. Now, Again, in the core rules, there's technically 5 or 6 different things you can spend these requisition points on, and when you start a crusade, you typically start with around 5 requisition points, or again, any amount that you and your friends want to agree on instead. You could even feasibly start with 0, if you really wanted. You gain requisition points when you, you play a game, you gain a requisition point. If you win a game, most crusade missions reward you with an additional requisition point. And then there are other ways to gain more as we go. But essentially you're going to be getting at least 1 per every game that you play. If you do start out with, say, 5 requisition points, as is normally the starting amount, what you can spend these on is 1, buying actual detachment enhancements for your characters, like you would do in a standard match play game of 40k. The difference here is that the first time you buy an enhancement for a character, it only costs 1 requisition point. The second time it costs 2, the third time it costs 3, and any further after that is always 3 requisition points. The reason why I say more than 3 is because in Crusade, instead of spending points in your army list on an enhancement, by spending these requisition points, they're permanently added to your character. So they're not added to their points value, it's just a piece of gear that they have. You can note that in their information in your notes app, and you just have that enhancement all the time on that character. This does mean a couple of things. 1, that character just always has that enhancement all the time. And this is the first place where some of the Crusade rules get a little bit wonky, honestly, and can result in some unusual situations and are prone to a little bit of power gaming abuse. So please, play responsibly. Don't build things with ridiculous rules and over-the-top combinations just because you can. Try to stick to things in the spirit of fun. It is narrative play after all. But I say that because when adding an enhancement to a character, you don't have to stick to using a certain detachment. When you add enhancements to characters, they have them permanently and they can pick any enhancement from any detachment that they could select an enhancement from. When you write your army list in Crusade, it changes from game to game if you want it to, which means the detachment that you choose can change from game to game. Which means you can end up with characters who have an enhancement from detachment A, but in the game you're going to play, you want to use detachment C. That's perfectly fine, and the character retains their enhancement from detachment A. They still have it, and in some cases that'll be relevant, sometimes it won't. It depends how much it keys off the things its intended detachment is for doing. Other times it can just be cool upgrades and abilities. Then the only other thing that you're really going to use requisition points for is repair and recuperate, initially anyway, which this is the 1 requisition point that you use to remove a battle scar if your unit gains a battle scar. So I suppose it hasn't been said at this point, but requisition points are basically tracked and spent between your games. So it's up to you to just sort of track it and just regulate how many you've got and what you spend them on. But for the most part, if you are going to be increasing your game sizes at a set point in time, or if you're just playing 2,000 point games to start with, then this is all you're really going to spend requisition points on. Enhancements and removing battle scars. You don't need to worry too much about increasing supply limits, because that's how you would normally increase the size of your games if you were using the full admin system, and you don't need to do that. It's how you would increase unit sizes, respec weaponry on units, upgrade characters to legendary veterans, and again, that's more complicated, more involved admin that you just really don't need. If you're just pulling from your entire collection and you just have a set points limit that you and your friends are playing at, then you don't really need to worry about these other 4 options. They're just, again, surplus admin for getting into the nitty-gritty and really granular version of Crusade, which is not what you want to start out with. And that's everything you need to know to get started with the very, very core basic fundamentals of Crusade. If you do want to get the best experience out of Crusade, then the next thing you are going to need is at least 1 other publication. So that's where these come into play. All the different Crusade books from Games Workshop. Now, at time of recording, the most recent Crusade book that was available was this, Crusade Natural Gauntlet. Unfortunately, if you go online to the web store now, you can't currently buy this right now, or at least you can get the collector's edition, that's still available, but not the standard edition. However, in the near future, we will be getting a new Crusade book that's already been announced, Crusade Armageddon, so I will certainly be picking that up, and that'll be a good opportunity for any of you who haven't picked up a Crusade book to pick one up. And it's also worth noting that for any of you that did collect or pick up the Leviathan starting box at the start of the edition, the launch box, then the Crusade Tyrannical War rules were actually included in the core rulebook that you got as part of the Leviathan box set. So if perhaps you've not played Crusade yet, but you're thinking about it, and you do have the Leviathan core rulebook, then these Crusade rules are in there for you already. So maybe you know a friend or someone in your playgroup that got the Leviathan box, you'll be able to get your hands on a copy of the Tyrannic War Crusade rules. Now, one of the main reasons why you will need one of these books, and why I would advise the Tyrannic War Crusade book if you can get hold of a copy of it, or if you've got that Leviathan core book, is because any of these Crusade books include the 3 other things that you need to really get the main thing out of the Crusade campaign. That is 1, the missions. So if you actually want to play Crusade missions, they're in these books. So instead of just playing with your mission deck missions, this is where you can find some unique Crusade missions, and there's usually about 6 to 12 of them in each of these Crusade books. Really good fun, really narrative missions. I definitely advise giving them a try. I play these regularly in my normal games of 40k anyway, even if I'm not playing Crusade. That's how good I think they are. The second thing is, these books are also where you'll find most of the lists of upgrades for things like battle honours, battle traits for different units, and Crusade relics, because they're not in the core free download PDF, they're in one of these books, and that's where you'll get access to all the cool upgrades and things that you might be wanting to play with on any of your units. Thirdly, it also includes the agendas system. Now again, all these things that I've sort of just talked about now are again kind of optional. Like, you could just play standard match play missions from the mission deck, and you could play the core missions that are in the core rulebook. You don't need the enhancements, the upgrades and Crusade relics that are in these campaign books, because your codex will include a number of them for your faction specifically, so you can use just those. But the agendas system is essentially the secondary missions system that you see in typical match play missions. So in a Crusade mission, you just have a primary objective that scores you victory points, that's how you win the game, and you don't have secondary missions. Instead, you pick agendas. And agendas are essentially like picking fixed secondaries. It's a certain thing that you're setting out at the start of the game to try and achieve. And sometimes that can be tied to specific units in your game, sometimes it's more generic to your army, and if you complete them, rather than awarding victory points for the game, they award XP for either the units that completed them or for specific units in your army. And that's another way that you gain experience to gain the upgrades to advance your Crusade and make your force better and more characterful and personal to you and tell its story. Bear with me, we're nearly there. You've got your core rules to download from Warhammer Community, say link in the description below. You've got your missions, agendas and upgrades available from your Crusade book. And then finally, the last thing to add is your faction rules, specific to your faction. Your faction rules are going to be the main thing that adds the flavour of your army to your games. So for example, if I started a Crusade force with my orcs, then in addition to having access to the battle traits and Crusade relics in whichever campaign book we're using, I would also have access to the unique Crusade relics, battle traits, upgrades that are in my codex that are specifically very orky things to go on orky units and do orky stuff. There's upgrades in here and Crusade relics of things like boss poles, dead hard armor, choppers of the Great War, all very orc specific upgrades and really cool fun abilities to your units that will make them feel very orky. There's even custom jobs in the case of orc ones to like really, upgrade their vehicles and unique abilities that they don't have access to normally outside of Crusade. It also includes some faction-specific agendas, which again, essentially, are kind of like faction-specific secondaries, which was a thing we had back in 8th edition, I think it was the last time we had those, but again, specific to earning experience for units in your Crusade army. Then, last of all, the one thing that I do want to mention is the faction-specific resource or campaign system that will exist in each of the codexes, because this essentially is the unique system that tells a story about your faction as a species. So, in the case of the Orcs, it's all about their staging of a war, and In addition to tracking requisition points for your army, in the case of the orcs, you also track something called stomping points, which basically represents how big and mighty your war is growing. And it includes its own system in here that explains by winning games, defeating the enemy warlord, leveling up your warlord, you'll earn stomping points from game to game, and that'll give you access to different upgrades and abilities in your codex for your crusade, such as new custom jobs, the boss's best gear, and there's often some sort of secondary factor to it as well, such as like basically orcs getting unruly and a bit of infighting. There's some rules for that in here as well. The best thing about these is they're very personal to you, so you don't need to worry about overly introducing the complicatedness of those systems to your other opponents or the other people in your group, because they're probably busy tracking their own thing. Chaos Warlords are busy trying to earn their Chaos boons, the Tau are busy trying to incorporate new worlds into their greater good, the Genestealer cults are busy trying to get through the stages of their political uprising. There's lots of fun systems. This really gives the heart and soul of your faction and your army within your crusade. I'd highly recommend including it, even though it is technically entirely optional. I hope that does help answer a few basic questions about starting your own crusade, or at least certainly strips back a whole lot of the unnecessary admin that you don't really need to use. As I say, the most basic stuff to get started is, if you want to start with a 1,000-point force, just start with a 1,000-point force. Write a 1,000-point list, use maybe one requisition point to buy your first enhancement, that's it. Then pick a couple of units from the army list that you want to track experience for, and track experience for just them. A couple of games in, you'll have some experience, you'll get to pick the first sets of upgrades that you want. Now those upgrades can probably be from your codex if you don't pick up a Crusade book to begin with, or you can even go with the basic weapon modifications in the core rules. And that's all you need. And then over time, with your friends, you can decide every 2 weeks, every month, you're going to increase the size of the army lists that you're going to be playing with. Or as I say, you can just start out with a 2,000 point list each, and just track experience on your units that you want to, and gain a couple of upgrades. And then, really, I advise digging into getting those Crusade relics, because that's where the real fun will start to come in, when you've got characters breaking out archaeotech weapons or ancient weapons of war from the War in Heaven, and unique chaos boons where your chaos lords are suddenly sprouting, clawed feet and wings and acidic blood and all sorts of fun stuff. You don't need to get bogged down in the nitty-gritty of the admin. You can really cut it down and simplify it to just say Google Doc, notes on your phone, each unit that you want to track, how much experience it has, what upgrades it currently has. That's it. And if you start playing the Crusade missions, you're then going to start earning XP for those units, and you're going to start telling a story. And as always, I highly advise playing Crusade missions, because I do think they are a unique and fun way to play the game. So yeah, if you have got any more questions about Crusade, then please feel free to drop a comment below, and I'll try and answer them for you. I'd love to engage and see if there are people out there who've wanted to play Crusade and get into it, but it's just felt a little too intimidating to begin with. If you'd like me to do a follow-up video on this with maybe some more explanation or a breakdown of certain specifics of the Crusade rules, let me know. It's something I might do. If you have liked this video, then please do give it a like, subscribe to the channel. We're talking about all sorts of more content like this, more Crusade coverage. We do our, fortnightly podcast. We talk about a lot of the faction-specific rules on Crusade. And as always, if you do want to support the channel, you can of course find me here on YouTube. You can also find me on Instagram at Narrative Wargamer. We have affiliate links below with Element Games, so if you do want to buy any hobby stuff from them, then we get a little kickback because they've come from us. And then finally, we do have the Narrative Wargamer Patreon, which if you do want to support us on there, then you get access to our Discord. And most importantly, you can also gain access to our free monthly mission that we do post up there, where every month I post up a new narrative play mission that comes with its own set of environment rules for an added layer of extra narrative flavour if you do want to play with those, and it gives you a new and interesting way to play 40k. It's an alternative to match play missions and the mission deck, and importantly, you can use them in Crusade. So yeah, definitely go check those out, and hopefully this talk today has just helped demystify and answer some of the questions around Crusade as a system, and hopefully make it seem a bit simpler for you guys to get into and start playing your own Crusades. So until next time guys, this has been Narrative Wargamer, helping you to discover more ways to play 40k.